One of the great political paradoxes people happily hold in their heads and beat you over yours with is the disconnect between the political narrative of the January 6th Capitol riot and the legal reality. The same people who tell us that day ranks among the most heinous crimes in this country's history aren't able to explain why it isn't corresponding with historical charges, historical trials, historical punishment for those responsible. And of course, you're a bad person if you ask those questions. You're downplaying the terrorism. You're making excuses for it.
It's just staggering to me that you actually have people in the media on the right.
Are we debating this?
Trying to downplay this.
A lot of this has to do with the memory hole, right? The riot going down the memory hole. That's what Fox and right-wing media has been trying to do.
Trying to deny and actually substitute a totally false scenario for what we all saw with our own eyes is indicative of how far gone they are. They're operating in an alternative reality.
Well, if downplaying criminal mobs is so wrong, get back to me when your outrage is properly scaled to the months of ongoing riots that claimed billions more in property and dozens more in lives all within the last year. It's not downplaying if the Capitol riot was in fact smaller in scale. That's proportional. And regardless, nobody denies that criminal behavior occurred at the Capitol. Nobody denies that such criminal behavior should be prosecuted where it occurs. Nobody's memory hold anything. You don't memory hole something by asking questions about it. That's the opposite, actually. And those skeptical of January 6th narratives have spent a lot of time searching for and openly discussing what actually happened. Nobody's creating an alternative reality. We're searching for the evidence that is the reality, because the supposed reality that you guys quickly and cheaply threw together immediately after has turned out to be a total fraud. We were told it was a murderous day. It wasn't. And the supposed murder that was screamed about for months wasn't one at all. Not just in my opinion, but in the evaluation and the conclusion of the medical examiner and the investigators and the prosecutors, who can't substantiate any murder charges for it. The only person killed by the direct actions of another that entire day was Ashley Babbitt. Now that's the one time that someone committing a crime finally deserved a cop's gunshot. That's an awfully convenient change in philosophy on police use of force. The word insurrection is still the day's preferred descriptor, though even with all the footage they say makes it so obvious, plus all the investigative resources of every federal agency, they still can't prosecute a single person for any sort of charges actually related to government overthrow. And nobody can explain why this attempted coup was so poorly prepared. I would say it was unarmed, but the fact checkers will ding me for that. So to be perfectly accurate, a firearm was present on a rioter that day, as in one, among claims that there were even more guns in people's cars, not present on the people at the Capitol. So we'll be precise, but the broader point remains. Historically speaking, if the intent is government overthrow, the rebellion usually brings the tools of the trade instead of walking around politely like prospective buyers greeted kindly at an open house. And the list of lies goes on and on and on. It's not that nothing criminal happened that day. It's that what did happen that day has been exaggerated to serve political ends. The consolidation of power, the silencing of dissent, the people who have become millionaires by stealing from us are claiming to be victimized by us. It doesn't take a bad person to question that arrangement. It just takes a reasonable and self-respecting one. And frankly, the best way to try to explain this paradox isn't with some complex stitching and splicing of the facts. It's just with simple, plain old government incompetence. If that day really was that bad, maybe the reason they can't bring the charges to match is because our government really is just a bunch of buffoons, standing on a ladder right at the rim, but still incapable of the slam dunks that all these cases supposedly are. And I could believe that, in part. Today's story is a possible example. Incompetence is always a good and fair first assumption, but anytime something is this botched and routinely, at some point, malice has to be a consideration. Beyond why nobody brought a gun to the great Civil War II kickoff, one of the day's bigger mysteries is what happened to Nancy Pelosi's laptop, or more accurately, one of her aides' laptops. It was a computer that Pelosi's office says was only used for presentations. taken from a conference room in the Capitol building. The FBI had originally arrested a 22-year-old Pennsylvania woman, accusing her of stealing the laptop and trying to sell it to Russia, but much like many other stories in this saga, those original claims fell apart. They never found the laptop with this woman, or any evidence that she ever even had it at all for that matter, and the accusation that she was trying to sell it to Russia was based merely on some tip from an ex-boyfriend, no hard evidence to show whatsoever. The strongest charges federal prosecutors were able to bring against her was aiding and abetting the theft, but not actually doing the theft. Until last week when the feds took another crack at it. Maybe the reason that the truth and justice have been so hard to find in this case, despite all the overwhelming evidence we keep hearing so much about, is because the FBI had to travel 5,000 miles to get it. On April 28th, agents covered the ground from D.C. all the way to Homer, Alaska, and raided the home of Paul and Marilyn Huper, hotel and spa owners in the small coastal town. FBI agents broke down the door, handcuffed the couple and their guests with guns drawn, and then rummaged through their belongings, including laptop computers, tablets, and cell phones, ultimately confiscating some of them. The FBI will not comment on the details of the investigation, but at least confirms the raid did happen. According to Marilyn, upon entry, agents said to the family, "You probably know why we're here," and she responded, "No." And the FBI agent said, "We're here for Nancy Pelosi's laptop. We know you were in the building and in that room at the time." Except again, the FBI did not find Nancy Pelosi's laptop. And that's because, again, the FBI had the wrong person. This time, though, it wasn't because of a faulty accusation. This time, it was because of mistaken identity. Or at least, maybe the FBI raided the wrong home. That's the common non-committal headline phrasing you'll see from your friendly authoritative sources. Though if the headlines typically skewed so far in the other direction on Capitol riot stories are forced to acknowledge possible FBI misconduct, you can bet that maybe in journalese translates to a certain yes in reality. But we don't have to say that just based on doubt toward our journalistic betters. We can say that based on the FBI's case itself. Paul and Marilyn Huper caught the FBI's attention when they were identified as mask non-compliant passengers on Alaska Airlines in mid-February. A person involved in that investigation was looking through Paul's Instagram account, noticed photos of Marilyn outside the Capitol on January 6th, and reported them to the FBI, telling the FBI that Marilyn resembles individual 225 on the list of people the FBI is still looking to identify. Other surveillance footage shows this woman in a down jacket present and unhooking wires on that laptop in Pelosi's office. And that seems plausible from a broad view until you look at any actual detail. Marilyn Huper acknowledges being outside the Capitol that day, as Paul's Instagram photos show, but maintains she never entered the building. The FBI believed she did, apparently leaping to that conclusion based on the assumption that these two people are the same person. But are they? Yes, they look similar at first glance, but Marilyn on the left is wearing a V-neck blouse and a gray scarf, no earrings. The woman on the right that the FBI is looking for has a snowflake sweater on under the jacket and is wearing large earrings. Can people change clothes? Absolutely. Does it make sense that someone would put on warmer clothes to enter the Capitol and doll up with earrings for the occasion? Not obviously, but even if Marilyn did decide to change clothes before entry, the FBI wasn't able to recover any of those clothes seen on individual 225 at the home of the Hupers when they raided the property. And that was, at least according to Marilyn, some of the stuff they were looking for. Marilyn also says her earlobe shape is different from the woman in the FBI photos. Honestly, the photos are too low res for me to agree or disagree. But even if you have doubts, even if you think that Marilyn is lying and she was part of this great Pelosi laptop heist, why doesn't the FBI have photos of Marilyn and Paul together? If Paul and Marilyn went to D.C. together and took photos outside the Capitol together, as we know they did, why aren't they seen together inside, as the FBI believed she was? Why would Paul stay outside, or at least leave her side while she goes inside? Why wouldn't Paul also be a part of this Pelosi laptop raid? And most importantly, if the FBI has this right, why are there still no charges against either of the Hupers? Why weren't they arrested? Why are they still free to discuss the story with the local paper and national TV shows? I'm sure the investigators and the prosecutors are still just working on the theory for how the Hupers did this, which is why they have to hang on to their confiscated property in the meantime. Just like the theory of how Brian Sicknick was fire extinguisher bludgeoned to death. Oh wait, bear sprayed to death. Oh wait, wasn't murdered at all. Just like the theory of how Parler facilitated the day's crimes. Oh wait, it was Facebook, but who cares? Delete the Parler servers anyway. Just like the theory that more insurrection is always coming, except it never does, but oh well, we like militarized police and walls now, so let's just keep that stuff indefinitely. Best case scenario, this country's premier domestic investigation agency is so comically incompetent they can't identify details or specifics necessary to solve crimes or administer justice. Worst case scenario, they aren't buffoons at all. They're a goon squad executing their intimidation orders exactly as instructed. Buffoonery can cover a lot of ground with missteps, no doubt. But can it cover 5,000 miles stumbling the entire way? To seriously believe that some small-town, middle-aged Alaska couple with possible ties to a PowerPoint computer is one of the biggest fugitive threats this country faces requires a little more than clumsiness. It requires total commitment to the exact sort of alternate, fabricated fantasy world that its true believers accuse the rest of us of living in. But to be fair, after a year of indifference toward unending riot episodes, replaced now by permanent pearl clutching about one particular riot episode, the rest of us don't get to be surprised by the hypocrisy anymore. At this rate, we hardly even have the right to be surprised when they kick down our doors either. In a final irony of this story, the FBI didn't just seize Paul and Marilyn's electronics. They also seized a pocket Declaration of Independence. That's a metaphorically deep confiscation, since they also confiscated the principles actually written on the paper. Here's hoping for a return of that property with similar metaphorical depth. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Gab, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.